The Forum of Ministers Conference on the Gaborone Declaration for Sustainability in Africa begins in Gaborone, Botswana from Wednesday to Friday next week. The GDSA is a transformative framework for pursuing sustainable development in Africa by tackling pressing issues like deforestation, overfishing and climate change. The forum is a regional policy framework initiated in 2012 by the Government of Botswana and agreed to by 9 additional African countries, including Kenya and South Africa. It is inspired by risks and rewards that come with increased investment and commitment to sustainable management of Africa's rich natural capital. Ruud Jansen is the Executive Secretary of the body, and he now joins us via Skype from Gaborone. Ruud, thank you so much for joining us. Now, there must be some strong motivation that led to the creation of this forum. Take us through that thought process and how it's going to work.
Thanks very much, Lulu. Yes, it was in 2012, just before the Rio +20 conference. Those 10 African leaders came together in Gaborone at the invitation of the President of Botswana, President Khama, and decided that they wanted to take something very distinctly African to the global platform, this global conference in Rio. And they thought that Africa had a lot of natural resources, but that they were, very quickly dwindling, and that they were not really looked after very well. And in further analysis, they figured that it really was because we didn't really know the real value of all the resources that we had. And so the ministers decided that the minister and president decided that it was very important for us to get a better handle on that value. And hence, a very important objective of the declaration is to get a better handle on the natural capital accounting, ecosystem valuation, and that type of work in the environment to make that case for Africa.
Now, Ruud, what do you find to be the successes so far and the failures of this initiative?
Okay, I think the successes so far that we did a bit of an impact study just recently is that all the countries that signed up, those 10 countries that signed up, and in the meantime we've got 12, with another 13 joining soon, have been very active in the area of natural capital accounting. So the countries that are doing their water accounts, forestry accounts, energy accounts, mineral accounts, livestock accounts, and it's all within that bigger framework of getting that much better information on what is the value of nature, how do we best use nature. Where I think we're still not so much struggling as in how best we can take this forward is in making the link to having that data and making the link into policy. How do you use your water accounts and having a better handle on, your physical accounts and your monetary accounts, where best to use your water, and let that go into policy, how governments deal with that. That is currently our major focus, to make sure that with all the information we have, we've got to make sure that the countries start using it in their planning, in their decision making, and in their policy.
Now, Ruud, let's speak about the issue of overfishing on the African continent or the African continent's waters. For instance, an estimated loss of $1.3 billion annually. Now, speaking about overfishing, is this mainly done by Africans or is it done by internationals who use African waters and overfish? What's the situation there? And you mentioned the fact that not a lot is done with regards to taking care of the property, and the natural resources are dwindling. In terms of the policy that you're talking about, in terms of bringing it to the fore and coming up with policy, what's going to happen going forward, and how are you hoping to deal with the issue of overfishing, more especially if it's not done by Africans on the continent?
Right. You're actually addressing a very sensitive issue, because you're absolutely right to say And in fact, what applies to fishing applies to a lot of the resources that we find are leaving Africa. I mean, we're talking about the forestry resources that may find their way right to the east. You know, all about wildlife and how our wildlife products are leaving the continent. We're talking about rose food from Madagascar. And fishing, in that sense, is no example. I don't have exact data on me as we speak, but it's part of a general situation where a lot of our resources are leaving the continent, and we buy back the finished products to some extent that are being produced by the countries who sort of add value, and we buy back. I mean, you know, forestry and buying back furniture is a very simple sort of equation, but it's that type of relationship. Now, where it becomes really difficult is how, at the African continent ourselves, if we don't have a real good appreciation of the value, we often sell ourselves too cheaply, if I can put it that way. And I always use the example of a forest. If we were to sell, for argument's sake, 10,000 individual trees that are part of a bigger forest and negotiate a price per tree, we're selling ourselves way too short, because that whole forest has a value as an ecosystem, as a watershed, as a potential pharmaceutical source of products. We're looking at the carbon sinks that the forest has. And that's just one example. You can do that for watersheds. You can do that for bigger ecosystems, your waterlands, your seas, your coastal areas. And that's the essence of Gaborone Declaration, to come back to its origins, is if we get a much better appreciation of what that is, then we may be more inclined to be careful about how we trade and how other nations are coming into our waters, into our territorial areas, and take resources away from us that we produce ourselves in a very similar way and be much better off and sustain livelihood instead of just trading and not do the rightful beneficiation, as it were, on the continent.
Now, on the issue of climate change, Africa is not amongst the biggest emitters of pollutants. I could be mistaken, but on the issue of climate change, what is it that Africa can do as a continent to ensure that we mitigate the pressing or the stressful environment that is created by climate change?
Right. You know, what they have calculated, and within Conservation International, especially associated with the GDSA, we have an initiative that is called Nature is 30. And that is based on the equation that about 30% of our solutions to climate change are based on what nature can provide, the sort of nature-based solutions. And in that sense, we think of afforestation, keeping landscapes there. There are carbon stocks, carbon credits, blue carbon in the ocean. So there's a lot of work that we're doing within the GDSA member countries to provide that input that the countries themselves find will help them in achieving their NDCs under the Paris Agreement. So Africa has this huge expanse of excellent natural resources and nature, and sometimes in very sort of prime state, that provides a crucial solution to the global program of climate change.
Now, speaking of the global program of climate change, and having seen the U.S. sort of pulling out and everyone trying to convince the U.S. as one of the big emitters of pollutants globally, you know, with regards to that, are the biggest emitters doing enough to ensure that they reduce their scale in terms of the pollutants that are being emitted, and ensuring that this doesn't filter through to the rest of the globe? Is enough being done?
I don't think enough is being done at the moment, and I think everybody realizes that if we want to reach our maximum of 2 degrees for change, a lot more needs to be done. But what did encourage me when I was over in the States not so long ago is that you find that a lot of the initiatives where maybe the federal government under Trump was saying, no, we're not really that interested, we're going to withdraw, you find that individual states, the federal states, are carrying on with that. And more importantly, there's a lot of movement in the private sector in the United States that really keeps on carrying on with that particular momentum. Because that momentum, I think, is there at the global level. China is stepping in. They're doing amazing things when it comes to renewable energy. India is following suit. So there's a lot happening. And I don't think the federal government decision in the United States is necessarily going to halt that. It might slow it down a little bit, but, it will carry on. Whether that is enough, we don't know. What Africa contributes is back to the earlier discussion. I think we can. We can contribute to looking after our natural resources, making sure we maintain our huge sink areas. Central Africa is the second largest tropical forest in the world, just after the Amazon. We've been sitting on a huge potential which we need to apply to solve that global problem. But the opportunities are there and we need to run with them.
Now, Ruud, very quickly as we wrap up, do you think that with regards to the problems that we're facing in terms of, overfishing in our waters and, climate change issues and the biggest emitters not really doing enough, do you think there's a potential of the criminal element being brought into play where it becomes a criminal offense to fish in certain waters? We've seen it happen in some areas where, there's been an offence brought forward or a case brought forward, but has it really been seen to the end where people are arrested for their actions and knowing what they're doing is wrong? Do you think that the criminal offence element might do some justice or bring a bit of direction with regards to people ensuring that they don't do the wrong things when it comes to certain areas or issues of natural resources?
Okay, I see two developments there, and the one is that, just to answer your question more directly, is that there is obviously a need to have better standards, to have fishing standards, and not let it be a free-for-all. Of course, we know that in the territorial waters of countries, African countries, we don't necessarily have the right capabilities, or we may not have the right legal framework in place, which we need to work on, and the capabilities of, say, what happens between, on the North Sea between the UK, the Netherlands, and France. They're in a much better position to regulate that. We've got the EU that supports those regulations. However, we haven't reached that stage yet in Africa. However, what I do see is some very interesting developments. Gabon just recently proclaimed a huge area as marine protected areas. There are a number of areas which I think their territorial waters are up to 25% of which have protected area status. Doing that, and other countries are following suit. Kenya just recently also did a big announcement along the coast, Malindi, Mombasa, Lamu. Those sort of developments help because they serve two purposes. One, they're saying, these marine protected areas are really important because they contain certain species and we need to protect those. On the other hand, they give them the framework to really be more specific in what they would allow. And they obviously don't allow particular types of fishing. They don't allow big sort of foreign vessels coming in and just fishing at random. So, between those two developments, I think we're moving in the right way forward. And we're probably getting much better control over the situation, hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years. I think we're on the right track.
Ruud, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We'll have to leave it there for now. That was Ruud Jansen, who is the Executive Secretary of the Gaborone Declaration for Sustainability in Africa, GDSA, and he was joining us via Skype from Gaborone in Botswana.